A long-forgotten doorway cracks open for the first time in centuries. Elara, a scholar of the lost Aylid civilization, steps into the archives, a place the ancient light dwellers tried to erase from history. She is not just searching for knowledge, she is chasing a truth that was intentionally buried. The air hums with latent magic, and the stone glyphs under her fingers glow with a faint, accusing light. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the profound secret the censors fought so hard to hide. What did the light dwellers fear so much that they rewrote history itself? And what ancient guardians now stir in the darkness just beyond her torchlight? I would love to know, wherever you are in the world right now, what time it is for you as we begin. What is the one piece of lost history you would risk everything to recover? The stone beneath her feet groaned, shifting like the pieces of some colossal lock. Elara's whispered incantation hung in the air, a thread of ancient power that forced the floor to reconfigure. Slabs of rock slid and ground against one another, pulling apart to reveal a dark, narrow passage descending into the heart of the mountain. But her success came with a price. A low, resonant hum filled the chamber, a vibration that was not sound but pure magic, and from the dark corridors behind her, forms began to coalesce from the shadows. The sentinels were waking, their spectral bodies shimmering with a cold, blue light, solidified from the very stone and air. They were the archive's eternal guardians, and she had tripped the silent alarm. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, not just of the approaching figures, but of the terrifying possibility that her intrusion might unravel the delicate web of spells holding this entire place together. One wrong move could bring tons of rock down upon centuries of hidden knowledge, erasing it forever. To retreat now was to lose everything, to let the light dwellers win their ancient war of erasure. So she made her choice. Elara turned her back on the gathering light of the sentinels and plunged into the darkness of the new passage. The air grew colder as she descended, the rough-hewn walls closing in. Behind her, the soft, ghostly scrape of ethereal armor echoed, a reminder that the hunt was now active. This was no static tomb, but a living, breathing entity that defended its secrets with an immortal will. The passage finally opened, and she stepped out into a breathtaking and terrifying expanse. A vast, circular library stretched away into an impossible darkness, its towering shelves carved from the living rock and stretching up beyond the reach of her torchlight. And there, in the very center of that colossal space, stood a single, illuminated pedestal, its soft glow a silent, undeniable beacon. It promised the answers she sought, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that it also held a far greater peril. The central pedestal hummed as Elara approached, its crystalline surface swirling with captured light. She pressed her palm against the cool interface, and the air above it shattered into 1,000 shimmering fragments. These were not orderly records, but chaotic shards of memory, the final days of the Aylid civilization, projected in a dizzying storm. One moment, she saw envoys extending olive branches to the emerging human tribes, their faces etched with desperation for peace. The next, the same scene was twisted, the Ayleids depicted as monstrous sorcerers demanding bloody tribute. The light dwellers had not merely erased history, they had weaponized it, painting a masterpiece of lies over a canvas of truth. The whispers began then, not from the projection, but from the sentinels now gliding between the distant shelves. Their voices were a psychic static that clawed at her concentration, making the fragments of truth swim and blur before her eyes. She had to preserve this. With trembling hands, Elara unrolled a scroll treated with alchemical salts, its surface sensitive to pure light. She focused on the most damning fragment, the one showing the Aylid High Council voluntarily dismantling their own weapons of mass enchantment as a gesture of goodwill, a fact the Light Dwellers had inverted to claim a violent rebellion was necessary. Holding the scroll steady in the projection's glow was an agony of stillness. She could feel the sentinels drawing closer, their disorienting whispers growing louder, more focused. The scroll began to absorb the light, etching the true image into its fibers with a faint, searing smell, and that was when the air before her froze. A sentinel solidified directly from the chilling haze, its form no longer spectral, but hard and tangible, a suit of animated stone and ancient magic. Its hollow gaze locked onto her, and it raised a blade that shimmered with the power to unmake memory itself. As it advanced, Elara's desperate eyes darted around the chamber, and she saw it, a pattern she had missed. The carvings on the walls were not mere decoration. They were a flow chart, a diagram of energy that all converged on a single, unadorned section of rock. It was a blind, a secret door. With the sentinel's blade sweeping down, she abandoned the pedestal, snatching the half-copied scroll and launching herself into a desperate sprint toward what looked like a solid wall. Her fingers found the glyph almost by instinct, a subtle depression in the stone carved in the shape of a winding route, the ancient sigil of Aylid descent. She pressed her palm flat against its cool surface, pouring the last of her will into the contact. The solid rock dissolved into a curtain of shimmering silver, a portal that snatched her from the sentinel's path. The world tore apart into a vortex of light and screaming silence, then violently reassembled. Elara stumbled onto a cold, metallic floor, her body racked with a deep, resonant ache. Her protective wards flickered and died around her, their magic snuffed out like candle flames. This new chamber was a cage designed to nullify power. Every piece of enchanted equipment on her person fell inert, their comforting hums replaced by a dead, oppressive silence. Her mage-light orb was a dull piece of glass, her warding amulet just a cold stone. She was stripped of every modern advantage, left with only her knowledge and her fraying courage. The air itself felt heavy, resistant to any attempt to channel the simplest spell. This was not just security, it was containment. Whatever was hidden here was considered so perilous that its very existence demanded a void of magic. With a grimace of acceptance, Elara unbuckled her now useless tool satchel, letting it fall to the floor with a heavy, final clatter. Her trust would have to be placed in the Ayleids themselves, in the truths they left behind, not in the crutches of her own era. The act felt less like a loss and more like a commitment. Now lighter and far more vulnerable, she pushed forward, her senses straining in the unnerving quiet. Then she saw it, a soft, rhythmic pulsing of amber light from a low archway ahead. From that same direction came a low, melodic hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate in her bones rather than her ears, a siren's call from the heart of the archive's deepest secret. The low hum resolved into a brilliant, painful light. Elara shielded her eyes, blinking away the spots to see a chasm of impossible depth, yawning before her. Spanning it were bridges woven from solidified sunlight, each one a narrow, shimmering ribbon that pulsed with a life of its own. This was the Hall of Luminal Bridges, a path that demanded absolute conviction. The first bridge felt treacherously insubstantial under her boots, like walking on hardened air. With her first step, the bridge she had just left dissolved into a shower of golden motes, falling away into the abyss. There was no going back. Each step forward was an act of faith, a deliberate choice to abandon a piece of her escape route. The vertigo was a physical force, pulling at her, whispering for her to look down into the infinite darkness below. And through the roar of blood in her ears, she could still hear them, the distant, echoing cries of the sentinels, a chilling reminder that her race through the archive was far from over. Halfway across, the bridge beneath her flickered violently. A section ahead began to fade, its light dimming as the structure itself started to unravel. Panic seized her throat. Hesitation meant a fatal plunge. In that heart-stopping moment, a phrase from the chaotic memory shards surfaced in her mind, an Aylid mantra for focus and intent. She did not think, she simply acted, whispering the ancient words as she launched herself forward. Her feet met the next bridge, not with a stumble, but with a surge of solidity. The light beneath her flared, then steadied, as if the very archive had acknowledged her understanding. The aggressive, testing nature of the magic seemed to soften, the bridges holding their form more readily as she moved. It was not brute force that the archive respected, but a comprehension of its creator's will. The final bridge, a broad platform of radiant white, carried her smoothly to a stone archway. The brilliant light and dizzying drops fell away, replaced by the profound silence of a domed room. The air here was still and heavy, thick with the scent of aged parchment, and the sharp, clean smell of ozone after a storm. The silence of the domed room was an illusion. Elara stepped forward, and the world twisted, the very air thickening into a syrup of distorted time. This was the repository of fractured time. All around her, floating like captive soap bubbles, drifted translucent orbs, each one swirling with the captured light of a single, vital moment from the Aylid past. One orb showed a bustling city of crystalline spires under a sun she did not recognize. Another held the solemn face of a diplomat, sealing a pact with a human chieftain. But as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the nearest sphere, a wave of vertigo slammed into her. The memory of her own name slipped for a terrifying second before snapping back into place. To learn here was to risk forgetting. She focused, pushing through the disorienting effects, and plunged her consciousness into the orbs. The truth unfolded in heartbreaking clarity. She saw the Aylid architect, Lord Ayachisis, presenting his revolutionary designs for magically powered aqueducts meant to serve all races. Then, in the very next orb, she witnessed the light dwellers using a relic of terrifying power, a multifaceted crystal they called the Censor's lens. They did not just burn Lord Ayachisis' scrolls, they pointed the lens and his entire lineage, his children and his children's children, simply faded from existence, their memories scrubbed from the minds of everyone who ever knew them. It was not history they had rewritten, but reality itself, snipping out threads of people and events with the cold precision of a divine editor. The cost of each vision was a piece of her own mental stability. a fragment of a childhood memory, the face of a mentor. These things grew hazy as the archive's temporal distortions punished her intrusion. Yet one orb pulsed with a particularly violent, dark energy. It called to her, a siren song of ultimate trauma. This was the moment the censor's lens was used for its greatest act of erasure. To look upon, it was to risk having her own mind scarred forever, her sanity unraveled by the sheer violence done to the fabric of the world. But to turn away was to leave the central mystery of this place unsolved. Gritting her teeth, Elara made her choice. She reached for the dark orb. The vision seized her, not as an observer, but as a victim. She was there, on the grand concourse of the primary Aylid city, as the lens was activated. It was not a flash of light, but a wave of absolute negation. She felt the screams of 10,000 souls as they were unmade, not killed, but retroactively deleted. The alliance they represented, a pact of true equality between Aylid and human, dissolved into a void of non-history. The psychic backlash was a physical blow, a pain that hollowed her out and filled the emptiness with a silent, screaming truth. As the horrific vision finally released her, gasping and trembling on the cold floor, one image remained burned onto her retinas. It was the lens itself, held aloft in a chamber she recognized, a place of star charts and focusing crystals deep within the archive's lower levels. Her objective was now terrifyingly clear. She had to find the censor's lens. As if in answer to her newfound resolve, a deep grinding sound echoed through the chamber. A section of the wall, previously seamless, slid open with the sigh of moving stone, revealing a narrow, descending staircase that plunged into a darkness that seemed to swallow the very light around it. The staircase swallowed her whole, a tight spiral of rough-hewn stone that corkscrewed down into the earth. With each step, the world grew quieter. The distant hum of the archive faded, then the scuff of her own boots softened, until the only sound left was the frantic drumming of her own heart in her ears. This was a manufactured silence, an oppressive blanket thrown over the descent to smother all energy, magical and mundane. Her fear became a loud, solitary thing in the void, and the urge to turn back, to flee back to the known world, was a physical pull at her chest. In the absolute quiet, her mind began to rebel. She heard the whisper of fabric where there was none, saw shifting shadows from the corner of her eye that vanished when she looked directly at them. The archive's defenses were not just physical, they were psychological, designed to unravel an intruder from the inside out. Gripping the cold stone wall for support, Elara made a decision. She parted her lips and began to hum, a soft, simple melody she had absorbed from one of the memory orbs. It was an Aylid lullaby, a thread of comfort from a dead civilization. The sound was frail, almost swallowed by the hungry silence, but it was real. It was a piece of their world, and as she focused on the tune, the phantom noises receded. The act was a declaration. She was not a thief in the dark. She was a student using their own culture as a key. This small rebellion steadied her breath and clarified her purpose, but it was also a risk. A vibration in this dead air, however faint, was an anomaly. Something deeper in the dark might now be stirring, drawn by the ghost of a song it had not heard in millennia. The spiral finally ended, depositing her before a massive, ornate door. It was a masterwork of metallic vines and crystalline nodes, a puzzle lock that clearly demanded more than just a clever mind to open. It required a piece of the one who sought to enter. The gate of requited truth was a living thing of metal and light. Its surface was a tangle of metallic vines, all converging on a single, flawless crystal at its center. As Elara approached, the crystal pulsed with a soft, inquisitive light, and a single, silent demand echoed directly into her mind. It did not want a password or a key, it wanted a story. It required a truth offering, a memory of profound personal significance, projected directly into its core. Her heart sank. To open this door, she would have to offer up a piece of her own soul, a memory so raw and defining that it had shaped the very scholar she had become. She closed her eyes, searching her past, and found the one memory that burned with the necessary intensity. It was the day of her first major historical discovery, the unearthing of a pre-light, Weller trade ledger that proved peaceful Aylid settlements existed for generations. And it was the subsequent day when Light Dweller sympathizers in her own guild systematically discredited her work, labeling her findings as fraudulent and her methods as reckless. The shame and anger of that public humiliation was a wound that had never fully healed. Taking a shuddering breath, she focused all her will on that memory, projecting the entire, painful sequence into the waiting gem. The crystal flared, drinking in her failure, her ambition, her shattered pride. The experience was excruciating, like having her innermost self laid bare and judged. For a terrifying moment, she felt exposed, a fraud not in her work, but in her very presence here. Was she truly seeking truth for its own sake, or was this entire quest just a desperate attempt to prove her long ago critics wrong? The door, however, was satisfied. With a deep, resonant chime that was felt more than heard, the metallic vines unwove themselves, and the great door swung inward. The victory was hollow, leaving her emotionally drained and questioning her own motivations. Yet as the door opened, she made a conscious choice. She accepted the cost. The truth of the Ayleids, a whole civilization wrongfully erased, was worth infinitely more than her personal pain, even if uncovering it meant the very foundations of her identity had to be reshaped. The moment the door finished its arc, a new sensation rippled through the archive. It was a silent alarm, a psychic tremor that vibrated up through the soles of her boots. Something far below, something ancient and immensely powerful, had just taken notice of her progress. The hunt had entered a new, more dangerous phase. Beyond the threshold, a vast, cavernous space opened up, so immense its ceiling was lost in darkness. Floating in the still air were crystalline structures of every size and shape, drifting slowly like icebergs in a black sea. And there, in the very center of that impossible chamber, pulsed the source of the Light Dwellers' power, the tool of their reality-altering lies. It glowed with a faint, sickly, and utterly ominous light. The Censor's lens awaited. The cavern was a forest of frozen sorrow. All around her, the floating crystals drifted in a slow, silent dance, each one a prison for a stolen moment of Aylid life. Elara moved with the caution of a ghost, her breath held, her body contorted to avoid even the slightest contact. She knew these were not mere recordings. They were emotional echoes, raw and untamed. One graze could drown her in a feeling not her own, but the space was a treacherous labyrinth. As she twisted to pass between two slowly spinning shards, the fabric of her sleeve whispered against the edge of a small, smoky crystal. The contact was feather light, but it was enough. The cavern vanished. A child's terror flooded her mind, a raw, screaming loss that was not memory but pure experience. She was that child, huddled in the dark, listening to the shouts of light dweller enforcers and the heart-wrenching cries of her parents being dragged away. The despair was an ocean, and she was sinking, her own mission, her own identity, dissolving into the absolute, gut-wrenching grief of a single, forgotten moment. For a handful of seconds, she was paralyzed, tears streaming down her face for a family lost millennia ago. The emotional shockwave was so potent, it created a physical ripple. A deep, grinding tremor shook the cavern, the sound of stone protesting movement on a colossal scale. At the far end of the vast space, a mountain of dark rock and embedded crystals that she had mistaken for part of the wall began to shift. An arm, thick as an ancient tree trunk, unfolded, and a single massive eye, like a polished black diamond, slid open. The guardian golem was awakening. Its slow, deliberate movement was somehow more terrifying than a sudden charge, a promise of inevitability. Fighting was not an option. It was a giant made to crush entire armies. Pushing the child's lingering despair aside felt like tearing out a piece of her own heart, but Elara did it. She did not discard the feeling, she absorbed it. That child's loss was not a distraction. It was the reason she was here. That specific, personal agony was the ultimate condemnation of the lens power. She channeled the grief, forging it into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Every soul erased, every memory stolen, was a weight she would now carry directly to the artifact responsible. As if the archive itself recognized her renewed purpose, the chaotic drift of the crystals suddenly changed. A path of larger, steadier shards aligned before her, their surfaces glowing with a consistent, inviting light, creating a bridge that led unerringly toward the central platform where the censor's lens pulsed. It was a fleeting chance, a window that would surely close. With the groaning of the giant echoing behind her, Elara abandoned all caution and ran. The central pedestal was cold under her trembling hands. The censor's lens floated just above it, a multifaceted crystal that pulsed with a soft, sickly light, and around its base swirled a complex ring of control glyphs. Elara's eyes raced across the shimmering symbols, her mind translating the ancient directives. She understood the immediate danger. A simple shutdown would be catastrophic, releasing a tsunami of restored memories and altered histories into the world all at once. The sudden knowledge that entire lineages, cities, and peace treaties had been stolen from reality would shatter the foundations of modern society, causing unimaginable chaos and paranoia. The golem's footsteps were deafening now, each impact shaking the platform and threatening to break her fragile concentration. She had only moments. Destruction was the easy path, a single, violent act of defiance. But true restoration demanded more. With a surge of resolve that felt like lifting a mountain, she made her choice. She would not break the lens, she would heal it. Her fingers flew across the glyphs, not disabling them, but rewriting their fundamental commands, initiating a delicate recalibration to release the erased truths in a slow, controlled trickle over generations. It was a surgical procedure on the fabric of history itself, and it required every ounce of her focus. The world narrowed to the flow of symbols beneath her fingertips. She was utterly defenseless, a scholar bent over her work, while a colossus of stone and rage closed in. The air pressure shifted as the guardian golem loomed over her, its massive shadow swallowing the lens's faint glow. It raised a hand the size of a cart, crystalline fingers clenched into a fist, meant to pulverize both her and the pedestal into dust. And then, a surge of ethereal blue light flooded the cavern. The sentinels she had evaded throughout the archive streamed through the gateway, their forms blazing with purpose. They did not attack her. Instead, they converged on the golem, their spectral blades hacking at its stone legs, drawing its terrible attention away from the pedestal. A battle of ancient guardians erupted around her, a storm of shattering crystal and screaming magic, while Elara, trapped in a bubble of desperate concentration, worked on against the deafening backdrop of war. The world dissolved into a storm of shattering crystal and screaming magic. Elara's fingers danced across the glyphs, her movements a frantic prayer against the thunderous clash of titans. Every impact, every blast of ethereal force from the battling guardians sent a shockwave through the platform. The censor's lens flickered violently in response, and the cavern around her became a madman's gallery of overlapping realities. For a heartbeat, the crystalline spires of a beautiful Aylid city gleamed around her, only to be instantly overwritten by the grim, fortified towers of the Light Dweller propaganda. She saw a verdant garden, then a field of ash, a smiling face, then a snarling mask. The very truth was convulsing, and her delicate recalibration was tearing at the seams. To look, to even acknowledge the chaos, was to lose her grip entirely. She forced her eyes to remain locked on the controls, her mind a fortress against the sensory onslaught, every muscle screaming with the strain of channeling such immense, reality-bending power. Her hands began to shake, the symbols blurring. She was losing it. In a moment of pure, desperate instinct, her free hand flew to the cord around her neck, snapping it. Clutched in her palm was a simple, smooth river stone, an heirloom passed down through her family with a single, faded Aylid rune, for remember carved into its surface. It was her only tangible link to the past she was fighting to save. Pressing the stone directly against the pulsating core of the lens, she poured not just her will, but her lineage, her very bloodline's connection to this lost world, into the connection. The effect was immediate and excruciating. A searing cold shot up her arm, leaching the warmth from her body, drawing directly on her life force. She felt herself weakening, her vision spotting at the edges, but the lens responded. Its wild flickering steadied into a rhythmic, controlled pulse. The chaotic flashes of erroneous history faded, the restoration process finally aligning with her intent. And then, the ground-shaking impacts ceased. The roar of battle fell silent. Gasping for air, Elara dared to look up. The guardian golem had frozen, its colossal fist halted mere feet from her head. Its single, diamond-like eye was no longer fixed on the sentinels, but was trained directly on her, on the simple river stone, now fused with light against the lens. It was studying her, not as a threat, but as a puzzle. The aggression in its stone-carved posture melted away, replaced by a deep, ancient curiosity. The giant was waiting. A wave of pure, white energy erupted from the lens, silent and immense. It washed over her like a physical tide, passing through the stone walls and out into the world beyond, carrying the restored truth of the Ayleids into the collective memory of every living being. The effect within the cavern was immediate. The guardian golem, its purpose finally met, lowered its colossal fist and gave a slow, deep nod of acknowledgement before its stone form crumbled into a shower of harmless, glittering dust. The sentinels bowed as one, their spectral forms dissolving into motes of gentle blue light that drifted upwards like fireflies. The oppressive, hostile magic that had saturated the archive for millennia simply evaporated, replaced by a profound and weary peace, as if the mountain itself had let out a sigh it had been holding for ages. But the influx of 10,000 restored histories was a psychic tsunami. Elara felt the weight of an entire civilization flood into her mind, the joys and sorrows, the innovations and the daily lives of a people returned from oblivion. It was too much. Her body, already pushed beyond its limits, gave out. As her consciousness faded, she made no attempt to fight it. She had chosen this path, and she would bear the consequences, whether the world outside was thrown into chaos or finally gifted with understanding. Her last thought was not of fear, but of quiet acceptance. She awoke much later, her body aching but her mind strangely clear. She was lying at the base of the now dormant pedestal, the censor's lens resting above her as a simple, clear crystal, its ominous light forever extinguished. The cavern was no longer a dark prison of sorrow. A soft, ambient glow emanated from the walls, and the air was filled with gentle, floating spirits, the benign echoes of the Ayleids themselves. They drifted around her not with anger, but with a serene curiosity, their forms shimmering with hues of gold and green. The archive was no longer a fortress guarding secrets, but a museum celebrating a life that was, at long last, remembered. Her body ached with a deep, resonant pain, but it was overshadowed by a profound and unfamiliar lightness of spirit. Elara pushed herself up from the cold floor, her movements slow and deliberate. The cavern was transformed. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a soft, harmonic hum, and the crystals no longer drifted in a chaotic ballet of sorrow. They now hung in peaceful constellations, each one glowing with a steady, warm light. As she approached the nearest one, its surface shimmered, not with a raw emotional echo, but with a clear, balanced memory of an Aylid market day, full of laughter and the vibrant trade of enchanted crafts. The archive had shed its defensive fury, becoming a true sanctuary, a library of a people finally at rest. A deep sense of connection settled over her, a feeling that was less her own and more something gifted by the space itself, as if the gratitude of 10,000 souls was woven into the very air she breathed. Yet this peace was fragile, haunted by a looming dread. What was happening in the world above? The sudden, silent wave of restored history would have reached every corner of the continent. Were people rejoicing at the revelation, or were they rioting in confusion and fear? The remnants of the Light Dweller Order, those who still clung to the power of the old lies, would not have simply vanished. They would be searching for a source, for a scapegoat to blame for this cognitive earthquake, and she was the one who had thrown the switch. To emerge now, unprepared, would be to walk directly into their hands. The decision came to her not as a choice, but as an inevitable next step. She would not leave, not yet. This archive was no longer a tomb to be plundered, but a university to be attended. She owed it to the Ayleids and to herself to understand the full scope of what she had returned to the world, and so she began her true work, moving from crystal to crystal, absorbing the restored chronicles of a civilization in all its complexity. She learned of their architectural philosophies, their agricultural magic that coaxed food from stone, and their intricate social codes built on mutual obligation, not domination. With each passing day, her transformation deepened. She was no longer just a scholar who had uncovered a secret. She was becoming a guardian, the sole living curator of a truth that had nearly been erased forever. The weight of this responsibility was immense, a mantle she felt settling on her shoulders with a tangible gravity. After days, or perhaps weeks, lost in this study, her fingers tracing a carved map of known Aylid sites on a vast crystal tablet, she noticed an anomaly. One carving, a depiction of a root system, seemed to be a separate, physical piece of stone inset into the larger crystal. It clicked under the pressure of her thumb. With a soft rumble, a section of the wall she had assumed was solid rock slid sideways, revealing not the ascending staircase she had used to enter, but a dark, downward-sloping tunnel. A cool, dry breeze flowed from it, carrying the faint scent of ancient dust and something else, something alive. This was not an exit. It was an invitation to a deeper network, a hidden web of passages connecting this central archive to other forgotten Aylid sites, and whatever new mysteries, allies, or enemies they held. The passage ahead was lined with soft, guiding lights, like dormant fireflies awakening to her presence. They pulsed with a gentle, intelligent rhythm, illuminating a smooth, downward-sloping tunnel that felt less like a cavern and more like a welcoming hallway. The air itself seemed to hum with a low, scholarly murmur, a stark contrast to the deadly silence and violent guardians she had faced before. This was not another trial, it was an invitation. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber that took her breath away. The walls were not stone, but living, woven light, shifting to form intricate diagrams of celestial movements, complex chemical formulae, and grammatical structures of a language long thought dead. Floating within the room were the Aylid spirits she had glimpsed earlier, but here they were not mere echoes. They were focused, their shimmering forms gathered around specific points of light, as if holding a lecture that had been interrupted for 1,000 years. As one, they turned their serene, luminous gazes upon her. One spirit, its form more defined than the others, glided forward. It did not speak with words, but with a cascade of images and concepts that blossomed directly in her mind. The offer was clear, a gift beyond any treasure. They would teach her. They would share the lost sciences of stellar navigation, the architectural principles that allowed cities to grow in harmony with the land, and the true, melodic tongue of their people, a language designed to resonate with the fundamental magic of the world. To learn here was to drink from a well of knowledge that had been poisoned and then sealed shut. Elara did not hesitate. She bowed her head in acceptance, a gesture of profound respect. From that moment, her life was no longer her own. Her days fell into a new rhythm, a timeless cycle of study and communion. She learned to shape simple spells by humming the correct phonemes, discovering that Aylid magic was not about domination, but about persuasive conversation with the forces of nature. She understood their engineering, which used focused resonance to lift stones, not brute force. Her old understanding of history, a patchwork of guesswork and buried clues, was systematically dismantled and rebuilt with absolute clarity. She was gaining insights no living person possessed, becoming the sole inheritor of a complete cultural library. Yet this incredible immersion came with a growing tension. How long could she remain in this sanctuary? The world above was not static. With every passing day, she felt a pull, a responsibility to share this resurrected truth. But she also knew, with a chilling certainty, that this truth would be a weapon in the wrong hands and a threat to the powerful. The established orders, the academies, the temples, all built upon the foundational lie of the light dwellers, would not simply accept her word. Some would call her a heretic, others a madwoman. Her transformation into a bridge between eras meant the certain obliteration of her old life, her reputation, her very identity in the world she once knew. The spirits, sensing her inner conflict, gathered around her one final time. They did not speak, but instead wove a shared vision in the air before her. She saw a city square in a modern capital, where a historian, mid-lecture, suddenly stumbled, his mind flooded with the clear memory of an Aylid peace treaty his own books claimed was a myth. She saw a farmer tending a rocky field, instinctively hum an old Aylid planting chant that made the soil grow rich and dark. The restored memories were already taking root, causing quiet, bewildering changes everywhere. The vision shifted, showing her shadowy figures in ornate robes, members of the old light dweller sympathizer families, gathering in secret chambers. They were afraid, and their fear was turning to a sharp, dangerous anger. They were searching for the source of the cognitive rupture, and their inquiries would inevitably lead them to the one scholar, known for her obsession with the lost civilization, the one who had vanished into the wilderness. Her unique knowledge now made her both a savior and a target. The guiding spirit extended a hand of light, not in a command, but a question. The path of the guardian was before her. She could remain, learning in safety until she mastered every secret, or she could step back into the sunlight, armed with a truth that could either heal a broken world or shatter it completely. The choice was hers, and the time to make it had come. The hidden exit deposited her into a world reborn. Sunlight, sharp and unfamiliar, pierced the canopy of a remote forest, dappling the mossy ground where she stood. In her pack, she carried a new kind of treasure, several palm-sized crystals that pulsed with a soft, internal light, each one a perfect copy of a foundational Aylid text or artifact. The air itself felt different, charged with a tension that was not magic, but the psychic aftermath of a truth bomb detonating across the continent. Distant church bells rang with an unfamiliar melody, and travelers on a far-off road were singing a hymn whose words were in a language no one had spoken for 1,000 years. The restored memories were weaving themselves back into the fabric of daily life, a quiet, bewildering revolution. She did not have to seek out the world, for the world, in its confusion, quickly found her. A delegation of scholars and provincial officials, their faces a mixture of awe, suspicion, and naked greed, intercepted her at the edge of a small town. They demanded answers, their questions laced with accusation. Where had she been? What had she done? Was she responsible for the headaches, the strange dreams, the sudden, inexplicable knowledge plaguing their children? They saw the light from her pack, and their eyes glittered, not with scholarly passion, but with the hunger for a power they could control. Elara stood her ground, the forest at her back, feeling more like home than the faces before her. She understood instantly that the truth, in its raw form, was a weapon. To reveal the archive's location would be to invite its destruction, either by those who feared its power or those who coveted it. So she made a choice, a delicate and dangerous dance of revelation and concealment. She would share the crystals, but only selectively, offering their light only to those whose eyes held a spark of genuine curiosity, not the cold fire of ambition. To a local herbalist, troubled by visions of forgotten plants, she gifted a crystal containing Aylid botanical lore. To a stonemason who found himself carving unfamiliar, elegant patterns, she shared principles of resonant architecture. She built a network not of spies, but of seekers, a scattered community, slowly rediscovering a shared heritage. This cautious approach was a double-edged sword. It earned her devoted allies, people whose lives were healed and enriched by the returned knowledge, but it also forged bitter enemies. The officials she turned away, the scholars she deemed untrustworthy, their bruised pride curdled into a venomous resentment. She had not just uncovered history, she had started a movement, and she was now its reluctant and exposed leader. One of her earliest and most steadfast allies was a historian named Clarion, a man whose own life's work had been upended by the resurgence. He found her one evening in a safe house, his face grim in the candlelight. The initial chaos was giving way to organization, he warned, and not the kind they hoped for. A faction of light-dweller loyalists, descendants of the families who had profited most from the old lies, was regrouping. They called themselves the Clarion, and they were not just afraid, they were furious. Their power, their status, their very identity was built upon the foundation of a erased past, and that foundation was now cracking, and they had a new, terrifyingly simple goal. They did not want to debate the truth, they wanted to erase it again, permanently. They were gathering resources and hunting for clues, determined to locate the source of this cognitive plague and smash the archive into dust, burying the Ayleids and their truth forever. The old apothecary's cellar was thick with the scent of dried herbs and quiet urgency. Around a rough-hewn table, lit by a single lantern, Elara and Clarion huddled with a handful of others, a small band of scholars, artisans, and even a former city guardsman whose world you had been shattered by the returning memories. They call themselves the Keepers of the Veiled Truth, a name born not of grandeur, but of grim necessity. Their purpose was a delicate, dangerous balancing act, to protect the archive's location with their lives while carefully seeding the restored histories back into a world still reeling from the shock. They established a network of trusted scribes and storytellers, individuals who could translate the crystalline knowledge into songs, carvings, and whispered lessons that felt less like a revelation and more like a long-forgotten dream, finally remembered. But every new convert, every successfully placed fragment of truth, was a flicker of light in the dark, and light attracts moths. They soon realized they were being watched. A stranger asking too many questions at the local inn, a shadow that lingered too long across the street, the distinct feeling that their movements were no longer entirely their own. The pressure was a constant, cold weight on the back of Elara's neck. She found herself studying every face in a crowd, her hand instinctively checking for the cool, reassuring shape of a memory crystal hidden in her cloak. The old ways of the light dwellers, the very culture of secrecy and control she was fighting against, now felt like the only practical tools for survival, and that realization sickened her. Could she protect this nascent hope without becoming a mirror image of the oppressors she sought to overthrow? Her answer was a defiant commitment to radical transparency within their small circle. She shared everything, the archive's general location, the full scope of the censor's lens, the very real and present danger they all now faced. It was a gamble that laid their entire operation bare, making them terrifyingly vulnerable to a single traitor. Yet that shared vulnerability forged a bond of steel between them. They were no longer just allies. They were a family sworn to a common cause. Their trust in each other, the one weapon their enemies could not easily break. The Loyalists, who now openly called themselves the Clarion, struck back not with swords, but with slander. Pamphlets began appearing in town squares, their elegant script accusing Elara of being a brilliant charlatan. The story they spun was cunning, that she had used her knowledge of obscure history to fabricate the entire Aylid resurgence, crafting elaborate forgeries and using hidden magic to plant false memories in the weak-minded, all to gain fame and destabilize the established order. Her credibility, her life's work, was now publicly painted as an elaborate, self-serving lie. The rumors spread like a poison, turning former neutrals into skeptics and skeptics into hostile interrogators. It was during a long, lonely night, seeking solace in the quiet glow of a research crystal, that she found their answer. She was studying a detailed star chart of the Aylid sky when she noticed a subtle anomaly. Certain constellations were connected by lines that did not align with any known celestial paths. Focusing her will, she traced the pattern, and the lines shifted, resolving not into a map of the heavens, but of the earth itself. It was a code, a sly cartographic cipher, pointing to several other locations, marked with the same winding root symbol she had seen on the archive's hidden door. Her breath caught. The central archive was not a singular vault. It was merely the first node in a hidden network, a web of sanctuaries scattered across the land, each one potentially holding another piece of their lost world. The coded star chart became their new compass. Elara and her small team of keepers moved like ghosts through the wilderness, following the subtle cartographic clues toward the location marked by the winding route. Their destination was not a mountain fortress this time, but the overgrown ruins of a temple, its collapsed pillars consumed by ivy and its altars shattered by time. According to the map, this forgotten place of worship sat directly above an archive dedicated entirely to Aylid art and spirituality. If the first archive held the bones of their history, this one promised to reveal its soul. The very air around the ruins felt different, humming with a latent, melodic energy that spoke of chants and ceremonies long silenced. But their hope was immediately tempered by a chilling discovery. The hidden entrance, a cleverly disguised slab of stone that should have been sealed for millennia, was already slightly ajar. A hairline crack of darkness promised someone had beaten them here. Kneeling, Elara ran her fingers along the stone seam and felt a faint, familiar tingle, the cold, oily residue of the same magic that had once powered the censor's lens. The Loyalists, the Clarion, had found the trail. A quiet, urgent argument erupted among the keepers. Some wanted to rush in, to confront the intruders and reclaim the site by force. But Elara saw a different path, one that mirrored the Aylid philosophy she was only beginning to understand. Direct conflict with the better armed, desperate Clarion would only lead to violence and likely destroy the very artifacts they sought to preserve. It was a race, but not one that could be won with brute strength. She made a difficult decision, one that split their already thin numbers. She tasked Kalin, and a few others to create a diversion. Their mission was to lead the Clarion scouts on a wild chase, using false trails and staged campfires to draw their attention away from the temple. It was a dangerous assignment, making them obvious targets, but Kaelin accepted without hesitation, understanding that a sacrifice was necessary to safeguard a greater truth. Meanwhile, Elara and a single companion, a quiet woman named Lyra, who had an intuitive knack for earth magic, would attempt a swift, quiet excavation. They had to get inside, assess the damage, and secure the spiritual archive before the main force of Loyalists realized the diversion and descended upon the real prize. The potential for a violent confrontation still loomed, a storm cloud on the horizon. Elara's greatest fear was not a fight over gold or power, but a battle over memory itself, a struggle that could see millennia of artistic and spiritual wisdom desecrated, or worse, twisted into a new weapon for the Clarion's cause. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting long, skeletal shadows from the broken temple, Elara and Lyra slipped through the narrowly opened entrance, descending into a darkness that was no longer sleeping. The air inside the temple hummed with a crystalline song. Elara and Lyra moved through a forest of translucent pillars, each one pulsing with a soft, internal light that seemed to respond to their very presence. These were no mere gems, they were resonant crystals, attuned to the vibrations of sound and soul. A whisper echoed into a chorus, a footstep into a drumbeat, and with each sound, the crystals glowed brighter, pressing against their minds with an increasing psychic pressure. It was an environment where deception was impossible, where every spoken word rang with the absolute clarity of truth. They found the spy not by searching, but by listening. As they rounded a pillar, they came upon Lyra, her face a mask of torment, her body trembling as she stood before a massive, throbbing crystal node. She was speaking, her voice low and choked, but the crystals around her amplified every syllable, broadcasting her confession through the chamber. She was not a true believer in the Clarion cause, she explained, her words laced with a raw, unfiltered fear. They had taken her younger brother, threatening his life unless she provided information on Elara's movements. Her betrayal was born not of malice, but of desperation, a choice made in the terrible space between a cause and a loved one. The revelation hit the small group like a physical blow. The trust they had so carefully built felt shattered. Angry whispers began, questions of loyalty and security, the unity of their mission cracking under the weight of this forced honesty. Elara felt the collective anger, the instinct for punishment, but the crystals amplified something else within her, a profound empathy. She saw not a traitor, but a mirror of her own sacrifices, a person caught in the same web of fear the light dwellers had woven for millennia. Her decision was swift and quiet. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Lyra's shaking shoulder, not with anger, but with solidarity. She offered not punishment, but protection. "Your brother becomes our mission now," Elara said, her voice clear and resonant in the humming air. "Help us secure this archive, and we will help you free him. We fight for a world where no one has to make that choice." It was a gamble on compassion, a choice to heal a breach rather than widen it. The effect was immediate. Lyra, weeping with relief, shared everything. The Clarion knew of this temple, but they did not yet understand its purpose. They believed it housed a weapon, a way to reverse the memory wave, and they were coming in force to claim it. Their main contingent was less than an hour away, led by a fanatical commander named Valerius, who valued the old lies more than human life. This information was a gift, but it was also a countdown. They were now critically behind schedule. As if summoned by the confession, a thunderous impact shook the temple doors, followed by the rhythmic, brutal sound of a battering ram. The Loyalists had arrived. Splinters of ancient wood rained down from the main entrance. Elara's eyes darted to the central crystal node, its surface now swirling with chaotic, aggressive light. She understood. This was not just a repository of art, it was a fortress of the spirit. Placing her palms flat against the node, she poured her intent into it, not to destroy, but to defend. The crystals responded. A single, piercing note rang out, so high and pure it felt like needles in the brain. Then another, and another, until the air itself was a weaponized symphony, a disorienting frequency that forced the Loyalists at the door to stagger back, clutching their ears in confusion and pain. They had bought themselves a moment, a single, precious breath in which to find a way out. The piercing symphony of crystal shifted into a low, melodic hum. Elara focused her will, channeling not aggression, but a cascade of restored memories through the resonant pillars. The air shimmered with visions of Aylid healers, sharing their arts with human villages, of architects teaching communities to build structures that harmonize with the land, not dominated it. The projections washed over the disoriented Loyalists, their angry shouts dying in their throats as they witnessed the profound generosity their own histories had denied. One by one, their weapons clattered to the stone floor, their faces etched with the bewildering pain of a foundational lie collapsing inside them. But their leader, a woman named Morwin, whose lineage traced back to the original light dweller censors, stood firm. Her eyes, burning with a fanatic's fire, saw not truth but heresy. She screamed an order to attack, her voice a raw crack in the melodic air. The confined space erupted into chaos. Elara's small team was outnumbered, forced to defend themselves and the fragile crystals against a core of believers still clinging to their shattered reality. Elara moved with a singular purpose, her eyes locked on Morwin. To harm the confused Loyalists would betray everything the Ayleids stood for, but to let their leader continue would mean the destruction of this sacred place. She reached for the largest crystal node, pouring into it a single, focused command, a memory of absolute, serene peace from the heart of the first archive. The crystal flared, and a beam of pure white light lanced out, striking Morwin not as a weapon, but as an invitation. The woman froze, her body rigid, her mind plunged into a vision of the world as it could have been, a timeline of cooperation and shared prosperity that her ancestors had systematically erased. She saw the cost of the lies, not in abstract terms, but in the faces of the forgotten. Her will broken not by force, but by overwhelming clarity. She slumped to her knees, silent tears tracing paths through the dust on her face. With their leader captured and catatonic, the fight drained from the remaining Loyalists. Most surrendered, their conviction replaced by a hollow confusion. The immediate threat was over, but the victory was fragile. The confrontation had been anything but quiet, and the strange lights and sounds from the temple would not go unnoticed. As the last Loyalist laid down his blade, the temple itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The floating crystals rose from their pillars, swirling into the air to form an intricate, shimmering dome of solid light over the entire ruin, sealing it from further intrusion. In the newfound quiet, a familiar presence brushed against Elara's mind. It was the guiding spirit from the central archive, its summons clear and urgent. The work here was protected for now, but a new storm was gathering, and it required her attention at the source. The resonant hum of the temple crystals settled into a profound quiet, and Elara knew it was time to listen. Closing her eyes, she let the lingering echoes of Aylid's song guide her into a deep meditation, her consciousness reaching out across the ages. The spirits gathered around her, not as individual forms, but as a single, flowing river of memory. In that shared space, they showed her the foundational crime, the act that went beyond simple historical revision. The original leader of the Light Dwellers had not merely used the Censor's lens to erase events. He had twisted its power, aiming it at the Aylid people themselves, severing their innate connection to the magical currents of the world. It was a spiritual amputation, a deliberate act to cripple an entire culture and ensure their descendants would never again rise to challenge the new order. This was why the magical arts had dwindled into legend, why so few in the modern era could even sense the flows of energy that once powered cities. The truth was staggering. Restoring the archives was not just about correcting history books, it was about healing a genetic wound. For anyone with even a drop of Aylid ancestry, the resurgence of this complete cultural memory could, over generations, reawaken that dormant magical affinity. The implications sent a shiver through her soul. This knowledge was a key that could unlock human potential on an unimaginable scale, but it was also a powder keg. How would a society already reeling from cognitive whiplash react to the idea that some of its members might suddenly develop abilities others could never possess? The potential for envy, fear, and a new, brutal kind of discrimination was terrifyingly real. Her immediate instinct was to shout this revelation from the highest tower, to offer this hope to every soul searching for meaning. But the weary wisdom in the spirit's presence held her back. Throwing such a volatile truth into a world still struggling with the first wave of restored memories would be an act of incredible irresponsibility. It could shatter the fragile trust she was building and give the Loyalists a powerful new weapon of fear to wield against her. The choice was agonizing, but she made it with a scholar's caution. She would share this secret only with her innermost circle of keepers. Those who had already proven their commitment was to understanding, not power. They would work to slowly integrate this concept through education, teaching the principles of Aylid magic as a philosophy of harmony first, a latent potential second. This deliberate, careful approach was the only way to prevent a new dark age of panic and persecution. Yet this secret now hung over their mission like a drawn sword. If the Clarion Loyalists were to learn that the archives held the key not just to the past, but to a magical future, their campaign would escalate from slander to outright crusade. They would stop at nothing to reduce every hidden sanctuary to rubble, ensuring the Aylid lineage remained forever muted. The stakes were no longer about history, but about the very evolution of their species. As if sensing the new weight on her shoulders, the spirits guided her attention to the base of the central crystal node, a section of the stone, indistinguishable from the rest, slid aside with a soft click. Inside lay not more crystals, but physical artifacts, carefully preserved maps etched on sheets of a strange, durable metal. They depicted a sprawling, interconnected web of sites across the continent, each marked with the now familiar sigil of the winding route. This was the complete cartographic record, the master plan for the entire hidden network of Aylid sanctuaries. Her journey, it seemed, had only just begun. The master map felt impossibly heavy in her hands, its metallic sheets cool against her skin. Elara knew the time for a small, secretive band was over. The hidden network was too vast, the stakes too high. She sent out the call, and they came, a gathering that would have been unthinkable just months before. In a secluded valley, under the open sky, the first council of keepers convened. They were not just her original allies, but reformed loyalists whose eyes had been opened in the temple, along with historians, engineers, and botanists from every major guild. The air buzzed with a cautious, electric hope, the fragile beginning of a new understanding. The council's first major decision was to create not just hidden vaults, but open doors. They would establish learning centers near each archive site, places where anyone, from a curious farmer to a seasoned academic, could come and study the restored histories in a safe, guided environment. These centers would act as filters, translating the raw, overwhelming truth into digestible lessons that could heal rather than shatter. But the debates were fierce and lasted deep into the night. A reformed loyalist, a man named Thuron, argued for total, immediate disclosure, believing the public had a right to every scrap of knowledge at once. A historian from the northern guilds countered, her voice trembling with fear, that such a flood would drown the very society they hoped to save, leading to mass paranoia and violent backlash against anyone with a hint of Aylid heritage. Elara listened to them all, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She finally stood, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the argument. She advocated for a bridge, not a bomb. They would begin with the least controversial archives, the ones focused on ecology, agriculture, and art. Let people first see the Ayleids as master gardeners and artists, as people who understood the land. Let trust be built on a foundation of shared wonder, before introducing the more complex and painful truths of political betrayal and spiritual warfare. Her plan was a deliberate, patient wager on the better nature of their world, but it was also a desperate race. While they debated, scattered cells of hardline Clarion loyalists were still out there, hunting. They saw the learning centers not as sanctuaries, but as heresy to be burned to the ground. Their fanaticism had only deepened with each defeat, and their network of informants was still active. As the council's vote settled on Elara's phased approach, a scout, mud-spattered and breathless, burst into the clearing. His report was grim. A loyalist cell, well-armed and ruthless, had been spotted skirting the edges of the Whisper-Fen, the treacherous swamp that hid the next site on their list, the archive of Aylid ecology. They were close, too close. The theoretical debate was over. Pushing back from the council table, Elara began buckling on her gear. The archive of ecology held the keys to healing blighted lands and understanding forgotten ecosystems. It could not fall into hostile hands. The next phase of their mission would not be planned in a safe valley, but one in a murky, dangerous swamp, and she would lead the team to secure it herself. Mud that was more liquid than solid sucked at their boots with every step. The Whisper-Fen lived up to its name, a suffocating world of twisted cypress and hanging moss where sounds were swallowed into a wet, oppressive silence. Elara led the small team not by sight, but by feel, her palm resting against the trunk of a petrified tree as she sought the subtle, warm vibration of the Aylid path. It was a trail of intent, not footprints, and to stray from it was to invite the swamp's unique form of predation. The air itself was a weapon, thick with the residue of old light dweller spells that twisted perception. One moment, Kalen would be walking beside her. The next he would shout a warning, seeing a bottomless pit open where only solid ground existed. The illusions were visceral, tailored to the mind. Lyra froze more than once, her face pale, whispering that she saw her captured brother beckoning from the murky water, his form dissolving into swamp gas when she reached for him. The psychological toll was immediate and brutal. A young cartographer named Finn simply sat down on a half-submerged log, refusing to go further. "I am leading us in circles," he muttered, his eyes wide with a shame that was not his own. "This place shows you your failures and makes you walk through them." The desire to turn back was a physical presence, a cold hand on every shoulder. Elara felt it too, a gnawing doubt that her entire quest was a selfish act of monumental arrogance. She pushed it down, focusing on the warm thrum of the path beneath her senses. "We are not our fears," she said, her voice cutting through the swamp's whispers. "These are echoes, weapons left behind by those who feared the truth. Look at me, see a real face, a real voice." She reached out, not with a spell, but with her connection to the Aylid spirits, a thread of shared memory she visualized as a silver cord. She poured her own energy into that cord, and a soft, greenish light bloomed at their feet, tracing the true path for a dozen paces before fading. It was the path of clarity, and maintaining it was like bleeding heat from her own soul into the cold ground. Each step forward was a conscious act of defiance against the swamp's despair, and with each one, she grew visibly weaker, her steps becoming less sure. While they navigated this delicate internal maze, the Loyalists carved a bloody, direct route. From a distance, they heard the shouts, the sudden screams cut short, the violent splashing. The Clarion was using force, driving captured swamp creatures ahead of them as living triggers for traps, and simply overpowering the illusions with sheer, terrified momentum. Their progress was horrifying, but it was fast. Elara's path, for all its safety, was a slow, draining burn, just as her vision began to swim and the guiding light at their feet flickered, the twisted trees parted. Before them stood the archive, a breathtaking structure that seemed grown rather than built, its walls a living tapestry of woven vines and ancient, intelligent trees that hummed with a deep, resonant life. And at its base, a gaping, scorched hole still smoldered, torn through the living wall by crude axes and fire. The Loyalists had already broken through. The air inside the archive of living growth tasted of damp earth and blooming night flowers. Elara stepped through the brutalized entrance, her heart aching at the sight of torn vines and smoldering patches of moss where the Loyalists had forced their way in. The chamber was a vertical forest, with glowing fungi illuminating pathways along colossal, intertwined roots that spiraled upward into a canopy lost to darkness. and at the center of it all stood the Guardian, an ancient, sentient tree whose bark was etched with the history of the swamp. Its voice was not sound, but a resonance that vibrated in her bones, a single, sorrowful question. Heal the wound, or the memory of this place will bleed out into the poisoned ground. The sentient tree would not fight for her, it would only permit her to fight for it. The ritual was a delicate transfusion of life, drawing vitality from the surrounding swamp to mend the archive's living walls. Elara knew the cost immediately, a temporary withering of the Fen's flora as energy was diverted to the greater defense. As she began the first chant, her team fanned out among the massive roots, their forms small and vulnerable against the shadows shifting in the branches above. The Loyalists were not scholars, they were vandals, tearing glowing moss from the walls and hacking at pulsing root nodes in a frantic search for a weapon they could understand. The first skirmish erupted as a Loyalist scrambled down a route toward Elara, his blade aimed at disrupting her concentration. Kaelin intercepted him, the clash of their weapons a harsh, metallic tear in the chamber's natural harmony. Elara's voice wavered as she felt the swamp's energy flow through her, a cool, green torrent that left the outside world momentarily grayer. She saw the Loyalists not just as enemies, but as sources of potent, chaotic energy, their fear and confusion, a poison that was already seeping into the archive's roots. It was a terrible risk, but she made the choice to weave their negativity into the ritual itself. She opened her consciousness, not to absorb their malice, but to redirect it, channeling their frantic aggression and their terror of the changing world into the forming protective barrier. For a heart-stopping moment, their collective will pushed back, a storm of defiance that threatened to shatter her focus and turn the ritual against them all. But as the barrier solidified, shimmering into existence as a lattice of golden light, woven with threads of defiant black, something shifted. The Loyalists caught in its glow faltered. One woman, her face smudged with soot and despair, looked up from the root she was trying to sever and saw the moss regrowing under her fingers, healing the cut she had just made. Another man, cornered by Lyra, dropped his weapon as a cascade of luminous pollen drifted down, and in that soft light, he did not see an enemy, but a memory, a long-forgotten childhood moment of tending a garden with his grandfather. The beauty and balance of the Aylid magic, the very thing they had been taught to fear, was disarming them not with force, but with profound, personal resonance. 3 of them surrendered, their conversion a quiet erosion of the Clarion's ranks. With the last of the hostile energy transformed, the barrier snapped into its final form, a shimmering dome of intertwined light and shadow that sealed the archive from further physical and psychic intrusion. The ancient tree spirit rustled its leaves in a sound like a sigh of relief, and one of its branches gently bent down, offering Elara a single, opalescent seed that pulsed with a gentle, sleeping warmth. This seed carries the echo of my purpose, the resonance hummed in her mind. Plant it where next you find a wound in the world, and a new guardian will grow. As her fingers closed around the gifted seed, a new sensation prickled at the edge of her awareness, a faint but insistent pull toward the icy, thin-aired silence of the highest peaks, where something ancient and adrift waited for its curator. The air grew thin and sharp as glass as they climbed, each breath a conscious effort. The ancient Aylid flight charms hummed against their wrists, lending their steps an impossible lightness on the sheer rock face. But the magic was a fickle ally in the churning mountain winds. A sudden gust, thick with a disorienting magical static, could send one of them reeling, their personal gravity flickering for a heart-stopping second. It was Finn, the young cartographer, who lost his footing. His charm sputtered under a concentrated blast of distorted energy, and he fell with a short, choked cry. It was Lyra, her own instincts forged in the swamp, who lunged, her fingers closing around his wrist while Kaelin anchored them both, the strain vibrating through the entire line. They hauled him back to the narrow ledge, his face pale with a terror that had nothing to do with the drop. The magic here was actively hostile, testing their resolve with every step. Below them, the metallic glint of the Loyalists' hired mercenaries flashed in the high-altitude sun. They moved with a brutal, mechanical efficiency, their advanced climbing gear biting into the stone, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Elara felt the seconds slipping away, the safe path coiled around the mountain's shoulder, a long, exposed traverse that would hand their enemies the Sky Vault. The only other option was a dark, jagged fissure in the cliff face, a cave system that pulsed with the same unstable energy that had nearly claimed Finn. It was a gamble with their lives, but she trusted the subtle pull in her blood, the whispered guidance of the Aylid spirits that felt like a silken thread leading into the darkness. "We go through the mountain," she declared, her voice thin but firm in the thin air. The cave was a tomb of fractured magic, light bent in impossible ways, creating phantom chasms and false walls, while the very rock groaned under the pressure of conflicting spells. They moved in a tight, silent group, Elara leading with her eyes half closed, following the spiritual thread through the chaos. The moment the last of her team cleared the entrance, a deep, grinding roar filled the passage behind them. The ceiling gave way, tons of rock and ice crashing down to seal the tunnel, the concussion throwing them to their knees. The mercenaries were trapped, but so was their retreat. They were committed. Stumbling out of the cave's far end, they found themselves on a narrow precipice, the wind whipping around them, and there it was, floating in the clear, cruel air just beyond the cliff's edge, the Sky Vault. It was not a single building, but a collection of crystalline platforms, drifting in a slow, majestic dance, connected by arches of shimmering force. As if in answer to their arrival, a bridge of pure, solid light erupted from the nearest platform, spanning the deadly gap to meet their feet. The relief was short-lived. For standing at the other end of that radiant path was Morwin. Her eyes burned with a cold fire, and in her hands she held a jagged shard of black crystal that drank the light from the air around it, a corrupted artifact humming with a deeply familiar and utterly perverted power. Morwin stood silhouetted against the shimmering bridge, her face a mask of grief, twisted into fury. The black crystal in her hands pulsed, sending jagged cracks of darkness, spider webbing across the luminous platform. "You bring ghosts to haunt a world that has finally found peace in its ignorance," she spat, her voice raw. "I will not let you unravel the only reality my family has ever known." She thrust the artifact forward, and a wave of nullifying energy slammed into the central spire of the Sky Vault. The entire structure groaned, a deep, resonant sound of a great beast in pain. The floor beneath Elara's feet shuddered violently, then began to tilt, sending loose crystals skittering into the abyss. To fight Morwin with force would be to play into her despair, to validate her belief that this was a war. Instead, Elara planted her feet, not in a stance of attack, but of grounding. She opened her connection to the archive, pouring her own stabilizing will into the fracturing platform, feeling the strain as if her own bones were the groaning crystal. "You were taught we were monsters," she called out, her voice steady despite the shaking world. "But what if the story you were told was the real monster?" She did not argue with dates or treaties. She reached for the shared memory of the Ayleids and projected it not as a lecture, but as a gift. She showed Morwin a vision of her own great-grandmother, 10 generations removed, not as a savage sorceress, but as a weaver of light-empowered textiles who sang her human neighbors to sleep during a plague. She showed her the woman's gentle hands, her laughter, the devastating confusion in her eyes as the censor's lens was pointed at her, and she began to forget her own name. The vision was intimate, a personal history Morwin had never known she possessed. The black crystal faltered in her grip. The rigid fury in her posture broke, replaced by a tremor. "You are not defending your family's honor," Elara said softly, the platform still trembling. "You are defending the weapon that murdered them." A choked sob escaped Morwin's lips. The corrupted artifact slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the shifting floor, its malevolent hum undiminished. But the damage was done. Freed from her direct control, the crystal's corruption bled out freely, a black stain racing along the platform's energy lines, threatening a catastrophic chain reaction that would shatter the vault's magical core. The victory over Morwin's heart was immediate, but the archive's destruction was now seconds away. Elara did not hesitate. She lunged for the fallen shard, her hands closing around its icy, hateful surface. The contact was agony, a frost that burned into her soul, whispering of oblivion. She did not try to destroy it. Instead, she opened herself completely, becoming a conduit for the pure, unadulterated Aylid magic that flowed through the archive, the very essence of the lives Morwin's ancestors had tried to erase. She channeled that river of light directly into the heart of the darkness. For a terrifying moment, the two forces warred within the crystal, light and shadow, twisting into a vortex around her. Then, with a sound like 1,000 bells ringing in harmony, the black shard dissolved into a cloud of iridescent mist. The light did not stop there. It pulsed outwards in a blinding, cleansing wave, flowing through every arch and platform, setting the entire Sky Vault ablaze with a brilliant, healing radiance. The cold was not of the mountain air, but of a void leaching directly from her soul. As Elara channeled the vault's pure light into the corrupted shard, she did not push against its darkness, but invited it in. The artifact was a wound, and it needed to bleed. It drank greedily from her life force, pulling at her memories, her fears, her most private regrets. It showed her the faces of the scholars who had mocked her, the sting of every failure, the crushing weight of the responsibility she now carried. But she held fast, allowing the poison to flow through her, using her own consciousness as a filter. With each painful memory it took, she offered a counter-memory from the restored archives, a moment of Aylid kindness, a human child's laughter, a treaty signed under a shared sun. She was not fighting the darkness, she was diluting it with an overwhelming flood of truth. The black crystal began to clear from the inside out, its jagged edges softening, its malevolent hum shifting into a resonant, melodic tone. It was becoming what it was always meant to be, a lens not for erasing, but for focusing and preserving memory. The transformation sent a final, cleansing pulse of energy through the Sky Vault. The groaning ceased. The shuddering platforms righted themselves, their dance in the thin air becoming serene and stable once more. The wave of light washed over Morwin, who stood trembling where her hatred had once anchored her. It did not feel like an attack, but like a gentle hand, wiping away a centuries-old stain. The inherited fury that had defined her lineage simply dissolved, leaving behind only the raw, unadulterated grief for a family she never knew she had lost. She looked at Elara, and for the first time, she saw not an enemy, but the person who had just absolved her of a crime she did not commit. The cost of this purification was immense. Elara's legs buckled, the world swimming in a gray haze at the edges of her vision. She was a vessel emptied, teetering on the precipice of a final, welcoming silence. But she did not fall. Kalen was there, his arm a solid brace around her shoulders, and Lyra supported her other side. Then a third pair of hands joined them, gentle and hesitant. It was Morwin, her eyes clear and filled with a determined sorrow. She helped lower Elara to the stable crystal floor, her touch no longer that of a foe, but of an ally born from a shared, brutal trial. Gazing at the now purified artifact, which glowed with a soft, opalescent light in the center of the platform, Elara knew what she had to do. Her voice was a ragged whisper, but the words were unwavering. She asked Morwin to take it. This was not a test, but a gift of absolute trust. She was entrusting the very tool of the Ayleid's erasure, now redeemed, to the descendant of those who had wielded it. Morwin's breath caught. She accepted the artifact, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy hatred of the shard she had once carried. The weight of it was no longer a burden of destruction, but a solemn charge. In that moment, the last remnants of the conflict between them evaporated. Morwin vowed to use her intimate knowledge of the Loyalist tactics, their safe houses, and their remaining leadership to help protect the network of archives. Her conversion was not just a change of heart, it was a strategic turning of the tide. As this new alliance solidified, a profound shift occurred in the world itself. The Sky Vault, now fully healed, pulsed in perfect harmony with the distant archives in the mountain, the swamp, and the temple. Their energies intertwined, creating a stable, self-reinforcing web of power that hummed just below the surface of reality. In Elara's mind, the Aylid spirits gathered one last time, their presence a chorus of serene approval. They showed her a final, brilliant cartographic image of this newly completed network, a constellation of sanctuaries now awake and singing to one another. And there, at the very edge of the map, one point remained dim, a single, silent star in the chorus of light. Only one archive remained unsecured, its location and nature still a mystery waiting in the quiet dark. The path to the final archive led them down into the throat of the earth, through tunnels that pulsed with a deep, geothermal warmth. This was the Nexus, the central heart of the entire Aylid network, housed within a dormant volcano. Its walls, forged from obsidian and woven with veins of molten gold, hummed with the combined resonance of every other sanctuary they had secured. To access its core required more than a key. It required a perfect, harmonic chord sung by the entire awakened network, a final collective breath before the legacy could live on. permanently and independently. But the air was thick with the smell of sulfur and the acrid scent of charred metal. The radical splinter of the Clarion, those who saw Morwin's conversion as the ultimate betrayal, had already breached the outer defenses. They were not here to study or to steal, but to scorch the earth. Their plan was as brutal as it was final, to overload the volcano's geothermal vents and trigger a catastrophic eruption, burying the sum total of Aylid consciousness under a river of fire and ash. The choice before Elara's team was stark. A direct confrontation in the narrow lava tubes would be a bloody, chaotic brawl that could destabilize the entire mountain, while doing nothing meant annihilation. Elara saw a third path, one that embodied the philosophy they had fought so hard to preserve. She proposed they split their efforts. Morwin, with her intimate knowledge of the Splinter Group's leadership and their fanatical mindset, would lead a team to confront them directly, not with weapons, but with words, offering a final chance at redemption. It was a desperate gamble on the power of a truth they had already witnessed. Simultaneously, Elara, Kalin, and Lyra would descend to the central chamber to perform the Unity ritual, weaving the harmonic energies of all the archives into a single, unbreakable tapestry of light. The dual approach was a race against a detonation, a test of whether their mission of peace could withstand its ultimate trial by fire. As Elara began the first incantation in the Nexus core, a chamber of swirling light and floating crystalline matrices, the mountain answered with a deep, angry growl. The ground shuddered, and a rain of hot pebbles clattered down from the ceiling. She felt the strain immediately, the sheer scale of the energy she was attempting to conduct threatening to incinerate her from within. Then, a new presence flowed into her, cool and vast. It was the combined consciousness of the Ayleids themselves, not as individual spirits, but as a single, immense river of memory and will. They lent her their strength, their millennia of patience, their collective hope for a future remembered. The ritual flared to life, threads of gold, green, and blue light streaming from distant archives to weave a shield of pure memory around the heart of the volcano. The volcanic chamber roared, a deafening counterpoint to the silent, focused symphony of light Elara conducted. Threads of energy drawn from the mountain archive, the whispering swamp, and the celestial vault streamed into the Nexus, weaving a dome of solidified memory around its molten heart. The mountain's rage began to subside, the tremors softening into a steady, powerful hum. But as the ritual reached its crescendo, a final, desperate cry echoed from a high ledge. The Splinter Group, realizing their plan for destruction had failed, launched a direct assault. A fanatic, his face contorted with hate, leaped toward Elara, a dagger aimed at her unprotected back. Elara did not flinch. She held her focus on the weaving energies, her trust in her allies an unspoken command. It was Morwin who moved, intercepting the attacker with a cry that was part anguish, part defiance. She grappled with her former comrade, not with the cold fury of old, but with the fierce, protective sorrow of someone shielding a newfound hope. The struggle was brief and brutal, ending with the Loyalist disarmed and subdued, Morwin standing as a living barrier between the ritual and the last embers of blind hatred. In that moment of conflict, Elara saw not a disruption, but an opportunity. The Splinter Group's chaotic, aggressive energy was a potent, wild force, and to simply repel it would be a waste. Instead, she opened the ritual's weave, inviting the storm of their frustration. and fear into the forming tapestry. It was the ultimate test of her philosophy. The hostile energy surged into the network, a black streak, threatening to unravel the golden threads. For a heart-stopping second, the dome flickered. But Elara held fast, weaving the darkness not as a flaw, but as a contrasting thread that gave the whole structure greater strength. The chaotic force was transformed, its aggression becoming resilience, its fear becoming a poignant reminder of what was at stake. The resulting shield did not just protect, it remembered the cost of its own creation. With a final, harmonious chime that resonated through the very rock, the ritual was complete. The volcano fell silent, its power now gently harnessed. The network of archives was fully and permanently awake, a self-sustaining web of knowledge and magic that would now gently seep into the world, healing its spiritual wounds generation by generation. As the brilliant light faded, a profound peace settled over the chamber. The combined consciousness of the Aylid people gathered around Elara one last time, not as guides, but as grateful peers. They gifted her a vision, not of a forgotten past, but of a vibrant future. She saw university halls where Aylid melodic languages were taught alongside history, city plazas where their resonant architecture was used to create public spaces of stunning beauty and tranquility, and children of all backgrounds learning their principles of ecological harmony. The lost civilization was no longer a secret to be guarded, but a gift to be shared, its wisdom seamlessly woven into the fabric of a healed world. The weight of her long vigil lifted, replaced by the quiet, steady purpose of a curator. Her work was not over, it was evolving. She was no longer the lone hunter of truth in the dark, but the first teacher in a new age of understanding. The final, dormant point on the map in her mind now glowed not with urgency, but with patient promise, a new story waiting for its first chapter to be written. The dagger's edge gleamed against Morwin's throat, a sliver of final, desperate malice in the chamber of weaving light. The splinter leader's eyes were wild, his voice a ragged scream, demanding Elara sever the ritual's threads. All the violence and fear of the old world was concentrated in that single, trembling blade. To fight him would be to validate his entire world, to descend into the chaos he represented. But Elara stood rooted, her hands still conducting the symphony of energies, her gaze not on the weapon, but on the man holding it. She saw not a monster, but a person drowning in the very lies her journey had sought to dismantle. She did not plead or threaten. She offered him a story. She showed him, through the network's shared consciousness, the lineage he thought he was defending. She let him feel the warmth of his own ancestors, not as conquerors, but as farmers and poets who had lived alongside the Ayleids in the brief, beautiful spring before the censorship. She showed him his great-grandfather's hands, stained with ink from copying Aylid medicinal texts that saved his village from a fever. "You are not protecting your legacy," she said, her voice resonant with the power flowing through her. "You are trying to murder it. The choice is yours. Be remembered as the man who finally ended this cycle of fear, or as the one who tried to erase the last echo of your own family's kindness." The supportive presence of the Aylid spirits became a tangible pressure in the air, a chorus of silent witness. It was not a threat, but an immense, patient sadness, the weight of 10,000 souls waiting for him to remember. His arm trembled, the fanatical fire in his eyes guttered and died, replaced by a dawning, horrified clarity. The dagger clattered to the stone floor, the sound insignificant against the chamber's harmonic hum. In that surrendered moment, the final thread of resistance dissolved. The unity ritual surged into its ultimate form. A brilliant, harmonious crescendo of light erupted from the Nexus, not as an explosion, but as a gentle, inexorable tide. It sealed the archive network in a permanent, unbreakable covenant of memory, ensuring the Aylid truth would now endure as a self-sustaining part of the world, as fundamental as the laws of nature. In the profound silence that followed, Elara felt the last vestiges of her old self fall away. The relentless seeker, the hunted scholar, the wary guardian, all were gone. What remained was a profound and steady peace. She was no longer just a keeper of history. She had become a living embodiment of its deepest lesson, a quiet conduit for the wisdom she had fought so hard to restore. The air was different now, tasting of rain-washed stone and new growth. Elara stood at the archway of the Heart of Memory, her hands resting on the cool, living rock of the entrance. Below, in the valley, the first lights of the new learning centers glittered like scattered stars against the twilight, each one a beacon for a world slowly, sometimes painfully, learning to remember. She was no longer the solitary figure, clutching a single torch in the dark. She was the center of a quiet, growing revolution. Historians who had once denounced her now sought her counsel. Artisans used Aylid designs to create tools that heal the land, and former enemies, like Morwin, stood beside her not as prisoners of war, but as partners in peace, their shared scars a testament to a conflict that had finally been resolved not with more violence, but with an overwhelming flood of truth. Of course, the path was not perfectly smooth. In distant cities, there were still shouts of skepticism in crowded forums, and fear sometimes flared in the eyes of those who found their long-held beliefs suddenly inverted. Old prejudices, like stubborn weeds, occasionally pushed through the fertile soil of this new understanding. Yet these challenges no longer felt like threats of annihilation, but like the natural growing pains of a world, healing a millennia-old wound. The profound contentment Elara felt was not the absence of struggle, but the certainty that the struggle was now worthwhile. The light dwellers had poured all their power into creating a perfect, silent oblivion. They had failed. That which they tried to erase had not merely been recovered, it had become the very foundation for a stronger, more compassionate future. Her journey had begun as a hunt for facts in a dead city, but it ended by planting a living forest of knowledge whose roots would hold the world firm for generations to come. Looking out at the emerging constellation of light below, Elara knew her purpose had simply evolved. The guardian of secrets had become a guide for seekers, and the future, bright with the promise of a truth that could no longer be extinguished, stretched out before them all.